I've found that there is nothing that tries my patience so much as a toddler. And if I'm being honest, it results in me not always being so kind. I can say this today, I think, because I'm pretty sure my parents aren't watching. They sometimes watch online, but I'm pretty sure that they are traveling because today is their wedding anniversary. I often think of myself as being a lot like my dad, and people will tell you that I sound like my dad, and yet my impatience and tendency to yell at my daughter, that comes from my mom. And honestly, I've not thought about it a whole lot. I'm doing the best that I can to raise my child. But I did think about it recently when I heard her playing in the other room, and I heard her being impatient and unkind with her words toward a doll, sounding an awful lot like her dad. Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians 13 that love is patient and love is kind. But when I admit that I'm not patient nor kind at times, I do know that I'm in good company. In fact, we seem to celebrate as a culture the unkindness. We embrace politicians who can sling words in hurtful ways and get good zingers in at a debate. And in the same way, we don't seem to want patience in our culture. We want things as quickly as possible, so much so that we figure we can always do things quicker, which has given rise to the self-checkout system. I don't have to wait for a worker to check me out anymore. I can do it, and I bet I can do it faster. Because if I have to wait for them to check it out, then I will sit there tapping my fingers on the counter. I might as well do it myself. And yet, Paul says love is patient and love is kind. Paul was a person that followed Christ with all that he had, and we, if we want to call ourselves Christians, have to pursue this call to patience and kindness. Long before Jesus was born, there was a great man of faith named David. And in fact, he is considered such a great man of faith that when Jesus is born, he's born into the line of David in order to show what a great lineage Jesus comes from. True people of faith through the line of David. And so today we heard a story of David. He's in a fight for his life. Saul is the king of Israel, and yet God has declared that he is unhappy with Saul at this point and has decided to anoint David as the new king, and yet David hasn't taken that position yet, and Saul is hoping to kill David so that he can keep his kingship. It's that time between the election and the inauguration. David has been chosen, and yet he doesn't have any real power yet. And Saul is trying to stop him from becoming king. And we hear this very interesting story. I love some of the stories in the Bible because they're so honest at times. And here we have Saul, who's in a moment of weakness, literally, because he has to, the Bible says, relieve himself, right? He's going to the bathroom, in case you don't understand the word. And while he's doing that, he does it in a cave in order to be in private, but he doesn't realize that he's not in private. There is a group of men with David hiding in the cave because they're afraid of Saul, and Saul has come this way with 3,000 men. He just happens to stop in the cave to go potty. And in the midst of that, David's men say, "David, this is your moment. You are on the run from Saul. He wants to kill you. You should get him while you can. This is an easy moment. He's busy." David clearly thinks about it because he creeps up on Saul. What he does in the last moment, though, is cuts off a bit of his robe and then decides not to do it. He then, when Saul finishes and leaves the cave, David goes out and tells him what he had just done. "I have a piece of your robe to prove how close I was. But I didn't do it because I want you to know that what people are telling you, that I want you dead, is not true. I am willing to wait for God's time. He has declared that I'm king, but I'll wait to be king. David shows both patience and kindness in this moment. The kind of patience and kindness that only a true follower of God would show. Someone who truly knows the love of God. And that kind of restraint is hard. You know, the book that Beth read said some forms of kindness can be easy, and that's true. But being kind and patient is more often than not difficult for us. We figure that it should be easy, right? And we certainly are more willing to be patient and kind with those that we love, but it can be awfully hard with those that already frustrate us for some other reason. And so the fact that David is patient and kind to Saul is all the more amazing because Saul literally is looking for him to kill him. And he's found him. He just doesn't realize it, that he's in the same cave as him. And I know that I said just now that it can be easy to be kind and patient with the people that we love and harder with those that we are already frustrated with, but you also heard me talk about the fact that I'm not very patient and kind with my family at times, and so even that is difficult, right? In fact, I think sometimes we're not as kind and patient with our loved ones because they can take it. They're used to us, right? They know how we can be. I mean, if you knew how often I sit down with families and plan funeral services and they say to me, oh, so-and-so was stubborn. You're like, yeah, I know. So is everybody. And that stubbornness, that's what it is in me, right? This desire to have things the way I want them, to make sure things are moving on my timeline, to make sure that they are exactly in my control. That's what causes me to be impatient and unkind to other people and to my own family. And so in the same way that I just said, it's sometimes easier to be patient and kind to those that we love and harder with those that we don't know. It's equally hard to be patient and kind with those that we love, and sometimes we act nicer in public because we've been taught to do that, right? We're a nice society, right? I especially know this. I don't know how much you know about Minnesota, but I'm a born and bred Minnesotan, and we have this thing. We say Minnesota nice. We are Minnesota nice. I don't know if you've ever been to Minnesota. They're not particularly nice people. I mean, not nicer than anyone else. And in fact, someone pointed this out to me one time because I have this habit of making fun of anyone from North and South Dakota, which borders us on one side, anyone from Iowa, which is our southern border, and definitely anyone from Wisconsin, my least favorite. And someone said to me, I've heard that you guys call yourselves Minnesota nice, and you're complaining about all of the people that surround you. It was a moment for me to realize that Minnesota nice is just something we put on, and niceness is so often something that we just put on. We try to teach our children to be patient and kind. But as you heard me say, at least in my daughter's play, she's not, and our children are not, and we're not. Because it's hard. And it's made harder because we've become tired and busy, and that in and of itself makes us less patient and less kind. You see, if I have 100 things still to do, then I don't want to waste my time being patient. And if I have 100 things still to do, and I know how few hours I have to do them in, I become unkind. David knows that he's supposed to be the king, and yet he still waits for God to act to remove Saul. He doesn't take it into his own hands. He's not going to be the one to do it. He'll be patient and trust the timing of God. And David knows what we often forget. You see, when we are not patient, there is one who always is, and that is God. I sort of found myself pondering, which is a sign of a good children's sermon, right? Beth said, "Do you think it's always easy for God to be patient?" She said, "I doubt it is." And knowing us, it probably isn't. And yet I also found myself thinking, yes, but God must always be patient. Maybe in some senses it does come easy to God, because here's what we say. We say love is patient and love is kind. And elsewhere in the Bible it says God is love. So if you're doing your mathematical theorems that you maybe did in high school, you would draw a correlation there, that God is love, is patient, and love is kind. God is patient and kind. God's timing is never our timing, and God seems to take an awful long time. And so we get impatient even with God. And who are we? I just wonder this sometimes. Who are we to get impatient with God, and yet we do? I just said this last week, that I think we need to say it more, and so I'll say it again this week. You know what we are not? We are not God. God is so patient that even that impatience with Him from us doesn't stop Him from being patient with us. He knows that we're not patient and kind, and yet He still seeks to make us perfect like Him through His grace. And that, my friends, is the gospel message. And we must be people who cling to the gospel because it teaches us patience. The very gospel is about patience and kindness. It's about forgiveness, which is the patience of love that overlooks the wrongs that we've done in order to maintain love and relationship. And so we have to be people who cling to the gospel because it's all about patience and kindness. We are saved. Even when we do bad things, we are saved. And that's only because God is patient and kind to us. And so we should be patient and kind too. As I am called to love other people, I am called to embrace patience and kindness. And be clear, it's a daily choice to follow the gospel of God's patience and kindness, a daily, moment-to-moment kind of choice, so that even as those frustrations come our way, we make the choice to be patient and kind, because it doesn't just happen, especially in this society and in this day and age. We have to choose to live an alternative lifestyle. And so, a few ideas to help us with patience and kindness. Try breathing. This is what we've taught my daughter. I just did it this morning because she was starting to get frustrated and impatient and unkind because things weren't going the way that she wanted them to go. And so I said, stop, take a breath with me. I just learned while we were at annual conference that this actually has a physiological manifestation in us. When we breathe in and breathe out, if we're in a sort of, if our mind is moving, so remember, our brain, we are these wonderful creatures. We have this underneath part of our brain that controls our sort of responses that we have no control over, but we have this huge prefrontal cortex that makes decisions for us. And often our prefrontal cortex, when we are stressed, it shuts off and shuts down. And we immediately go to that sort of, we call it the mammalian brain because it's what we have in common with other animals that are like us. And when we're going and moving toward a fight or flight response because of stress, we shut off our prefrontal cortex and move to that mammalian brain. But breathing reconnects us. It literally helps us to release some of that tension. Because if you think about it, when you're stressed and tensed and you're waiting to figure out if you're going to run or fight, you hold your breath, right? But we can reconnect if we just take a breath. You try it. You'll actually feel yourself change and relax. As much as I teach my daughter to do this, I forget to do it. I get locked with her, and I'm holding my breath. until she gives in. And let me tell you, most of the time I end up on the floor. Breathe. And pause. Right? We also do this with our daughter, with a toddler, and we all need to learn it as well. Maybe take a little time out. The person that's best at reminding me about this is my wife, who, when I am in the midst of being locked in a battle with my daughter and I'm being impatient and unkind, she says, "Why don't I take her for a moment? And you go step outside," right? Even I need to take a moment, and we practice this with our daughter as well. Take a moment, reconnect again with your brain, breathe and pause and sort of refocus. And I know, again, this can be really hard, especially when we are running into the store just to grab one thing and someone is in our way. Why are they standing right in front of what I need, right? I just need to grab it and go, and now there's a line, and I stop breathing. I just need to breathe and pause. And then check in with yourself, right? My wife and I often will ask each other when we're in the midst of being less patient than we should be and perhaps less kind than we should be, we will say, "Do you need to eat something or do you need to go to sleep?" Because here's the thing. We are all just giant toddlers. And half the time, our issue is that we are just hungry and cranky, or we are overtired. I already mentioned that this is what makes it hard to be patient and kind, is that we are overtired and too busy. Maybe you just need to go take a nap. And do you notice that David does this? He's encouraged by his men to go do the thing. This is what Saul deserves. Be unkind to him and take what's yours and be impatient to be king. But instead, David does go, but in the midst of that, clearly he stops. We're not told exactly that he breathes, but clearly there's a moment where he pauses. And in the midst of that, I think he must breathe. And he decides to act differently. He decides to choose God's path. We are all just one of God's creations. And the other thing that we need to remember in the midst of our tendency to be impatient and unkind is that all of us are God's creation. And so that person that is just driving you nuts because they will not move, or you just want to say something catty to them because they just did something that you think is not right, they're one of God's children too. And God is always patient and kind and is to them, whether you want to be in that moment or not. God is patient with all of his creations, and we're called to be that kind of person too. This entire year we've been talking about sharing God's love with the world, and we are ending June. So just a reminder to you, in case you don't know, the appointment process in the United Methodist Church is from July 1st to the end of June every year. And so I didn't mention this before, but just a reminder, I just was at annual conference. That's where they set appointments for the year. And I'm still your pastor for another year. So if you're happy, then yeah. And as I remind people who may not be happy, it's only for the next year. Right? Start writing your letters now. Anyway, what we do then as a worship team is plan a year of preaching that starts in July and ends at the end of June, so that if you were to get a new pastor, they wouldn't be saddled with my ideas of what they should preach, and so it ends at the end of June. So we've been focused this year on sharing God's love, because it's part of our vision statement. Remember, I'm not always good at reminding you, but our vision statement is joyfully reaching out to share God's love and faith in Jesus with everyone, right? And so we've been working slowly through this. We did a year of joy. We did a year on reaching out. This year is focused on sharing God's love. Come July, we're going to start focusing on a year of sharing our faith in Jesus with other people. But I want to end this year by talking again about love. And so we're going to end June by talking about what love is. Love is patient and kind. And if we're serious about being people who share God's love, which is part of our vision statement, then we must be people who show the world patience and kindness, just like David does, just like Paul teaches us by saying love is patient and love is kind, and most importantly, just like God models for us through his Son, Jesus Christ, and through the gospel. It's clear that love is countercultural, which is weird, right? Because, of course, if you turn on the TV, you'd be fed a lot of people saying, oh, we're showing you love all the time, right? Love stories and romances and things. But true love, God's love, love like that is countercultural. And it's clear that it is, because if love is patient and love is kind, and our culture is frequently impatient and unkind, then we are clearly not a culture of love. We talk about love a lot, but not the kind of love that Paul talks about, and not the kind of love that David lives, and not the kind of love that God is. We must be different. We must be patient and kind, showing God's love to the world by being patient and kind with them. Make people wonder why it is that we're different than everyone else. Why is it that even though we have 100 things to do, we say to the person who looks more impatient than us right now, why don't you go ahead of me? Why is it that that person, when I just called them whatever, I guess I shouldn't say it, that they said, thank you, you have a nice day. I hope that your day goes better than it is right now. Because when we do that, when they wonder why it is that we're acting differently, then we have an opportunity to share more of the gospel with them. And that's what we're going to be talking about in this next year, is how it is that we share our faith in Jesus Christ with them. So be patient and kind today, and this week, and each day, and each moment. Make the choice to be patient and kind. Breathe and pause and check in and make sure you don't need to eat something or take a nap. We all need to take a nap, probably. Go home after church today and take a nap. Some of you are taking a nap right now. Follow God's lead and show that love is patient and love is kind. Show the world who God is and show God's love to everyone. Amen.